initially started thinking about birth control side effects, unfortunately, because this was a problem I myself experienced when I was gaslit by my medical professional. I was just like, you know what? Everything in my body is screaming that my birth control is responsible. Started talking to girlfriends and realized one of my best friends had crippling death anxiety. I had two friends who had blood clots. And then I had friends who were like, no, I love my birth control. My mood is better. My skin is better. And I just realized, this is a precision medicine problem that no one is working on. How do we not take this one-size-fits-all approach to prescribing and medicine in general? And how do we leverage what we understand about the body and biology to make that more personalized?
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Play Brydge podcast. Today, we are welcoming Elizabeth Ruzzo. She is the founder of Aydn, the first and only test designed to prevent birth control side effects like blood clots, depression, acne, and weight gain. Elizabeth received her PhD in Genetics and Genomics from Duke University and launched Aydn after her own experience with life-threatening birth control side effects. Elizabeth has raised $3.25 million in venture capital funding from investors including M13, YC, and Wojcicki, the founder of 23andMe. So Elizabeth, so excited to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, to kick it off, will you just start by sharing your founding story? Like, how did you first come up with the idea for Aydn and how did you get it off the ground?
Yeah. So as you shared in that great intro, I initially started thinking about birth control side effects, unfortunately, because this was a problem I myself experienced. So in my case, my birth control side effect was suicidal ideation, and I was gaslit by my medical professionals. I continued suffering for several more months until finally I was just like, you know what? Everything in my body is screaming that my birth control is responsible. And so that's when I went off of it and started feeling better, and then started talking to girlfriends and realized, not all of them had depression or definitely not suicidal ideation, but one of my best friends had crippling death anxiety. I had two friends who had blood clots and a friend who had her gallbladder removed. And then I had friends who were like, no, I love my birth control. My mood is better. My skin is better. I can control my period and my PMS. And I just realized, this is a precision medicine problem that no one is working on. And I sort of put that in the corner because I was busy doing my PhD in genetics at the time, thinking someone else will figure this out, right? But nobody had after I did both a PhD and a postdoc. And my kind of scientific light bulb moment was around the approach that we're taking, which is to combine understanding one's genetic risk together with understanding their hormone levels over time, and how those two data sets combined could help us not just help people find the right birth control, but do all kinds of things for precision medicine, which is basically one way of saying, like, how do we not take this one size fits all approach to prescribing and medicine in general, and how do we leverage what we understand about the body and biology to make that more personalized?
One, what are like all of the different types of birth control that women can try? And two, like before Aydn, I guess in my experience, I think my doctor just was like, here, let's try you on this one. Like, how are doctors prescribing it, without Aydn?
So we at Aydn make recommendations for all highly effective methods of birth control. So that's anything that is 98% effective or greater at preventing unwanted pregnancy with perfect use. And so the way these are most commonly categorized is by delivery method. So the pill is the most famous, but you also have the patch, the ring, the IUD, the arm implant, and the shot. And then there are all kinds of different things behind the scenes, behind what you might think about, that go into that. So the other way is these different options differ, and there are 200 prescription options on the market, is what are the active ingredients? So is it progestin alone, or is it progestin and estrogen? Those are kind of the two broadest options. And then there's more details about the chemical formulations under there, how much of those hormones are present. And then is that amount of hormone delivered in a way that's the same over time, or is it variable throughout the time that you take it? And the way doctors currently pick it is the gold standard is the CDC MEC, or Medical Eligibility Criteria for Contraceptive Prescribing. And so basically that has high level, what are called contraindications, which basically say things like, if you're taking an anti-seizure medication, this birth control might be counteracted and not actually be effective for you at preventing pregnancy. Or if you're a smoker over 35, you're at elevated risk of cardiovascular disease on these specific kinds of birth control, that kind of thing. But unfortunately, as was the case for you and for me, what really happens is there's a lot of trial and error. So your doctor maybe has their favorite, maybe has their current favorite, and they're like, let's start here and just see what happens, which kind of makes us our own like science experiment every time.
And so how today is Aydn doing things differently?
So at Aydn, we really bring in science into this equation. So we do a couple of things. So the first thing we do differently is we do a structured intake for your medical history. So we get all the information we can about anything that's relevant to prescribing your birth control. We also ask you about any current or past methods that you've taken. And that's really important because the current average duration of a contraceptive counseling visit with your doctor is only 13 minutes. It is frequently as low as 4 minutes. So that's hardly enough time for someone to collect all of that information about you and then help make a decision amongst those 200 options, right? So that's the first thing we do, is we do that structured medical intake of all the relevant information. Then you also give us a saliva sample that we use to analyze DNA, and a finger spot of blood that you collect on day 3 of your cycle that we use to analyze 6 different hormones that are relevant for your reproductive health. And then we put all of that together with over 60 peer-reviewed publications to generate a personalized set of recommendations for which methods make the most sense for you. And because it was really important to me to not leave people sitting there with some of the information we give, like you might be at a 30-fold increased risk of a blood clot, we also vertically integrated to offer virtual care, which also then means we can have them write a prescription that Aydn's partner pharmacy can fulfill discreetly in under 48 hours.
What do you learn specifically from the saliva test and the blood test?
So we started with some of the most dangerous contraindications. So from the saliva test, right now we look at genetic risk for blood clot and genetic risk for depression. From the blood test, we look at things like, do you have elevated androgens? Androgens are a class of hormone that you can think of as being testosterone-like, right? So a lot of forms of progestins end up being more androgenic than others. So if you have symptoms like unwanted hair growth, acne, etc., you might either have elevated androgens or you might be taking a progestin that is very testosterone-like that's exacerbating that for you. So those are the kinds of things we can look at. Plus, the other thing that we get in that structured medical intake is preference, right? If you're going to your doctor for blood pressure meds, there's no preference. They're just picking what's going to lower your blood pressure. With birth control, there's a lot of preference there. So we get to layer that in addition to help you make the best decision.
For people that might be more prone to blood clots, depression, or acne, what are some of the better forms of birth control for those people?
So it definitely depends. If you're prone to blood clot, for example, you shouldn't be taking an estrogen containing method. The downside of that is if you have a blood clot risk and one of the other things you mentioned, you wanted to, let's say, treat your acne, estrogen is good for that. So there has to be this prioritization where we say, like, sorry, it would be nice if this could be your solution for acne, but in your case, because of the unacceptable risk posed by this estrogen containing birth control, you shouldn't take it. So the recommendations we give are really personalized. We already, like, if you go through the Aydn process, you get one of 1,000 possible reports right now. That number is soon to be one of 100,000 possible reports because we're adding an additional layer of specificity to those tests. So it really just depends on what went into it, what you're looking for, and that helps determine, what the best of the 200 options is for you.
And today, do you work with doctors, or how, if I wanted to go get my Aydn test, how would that look for me and other consumers?
Yeah, so right now we launch direct to consumer. So people can, go to aydn.com and purchase a test themselves. Behind the scenes, we have a physician who technically orders the test and also reviews your results before you ever see them. And then we are starting to collaborate with doctors. So we've been getting primarily OB-GYNs, though some different specialties too, reaching out, wanting to use the birth control test in their prescribing practice. I think that just really speaks to the fact that they understand that the current standard of care is failing them and that there are massive advantages to our approach and to giving them, the guideline right next to that person's risk factor, for example.
So what goes into like developing the Aydn test, and like how long did it take you? Like how did you actually develop it?
Yeah, it took a long time.
I'm sure.
I think the hardest part was just honestly starting to curate hundreds and hundreds of papers. So in theory, someone without a scientific background might say like, oh, well, this is in the literature, so it must be true. Well, no, you can look almost anything up and find something conflicting. You really have to have a deep understanding of things like, what is the sample size? What is the statistical power in this finding? If there is a conflicting finding, is it because that one was underpowered compared to the one that did this? Has a finding been independently replicated, et cetera? So that is a heavy and long process. And developing it then also required everything down to like the beyond even the science, the logistics, right? So we're lucky in that the way we generate the raw data, so meaning the genetic variants we look at and the hormone levels we look at, are really, really robust techniques that have been well established. And so we run all of that in CLIA certified labs, which means they're held to the highest possible standards. So our data is really robust, but we also had to figure out all the logistics. And let me tell you, anything a consumer can do wrong when collecting their sample, they will. We watched someone spit into the wrong end of a saliva tube one time. That was pretty wild.
Oh no.
And unsurprisingly, I mean, pricking your finger can be tricky, right? And so a lot of trial and error in figuring out, like, how do we message around collection? How can we support people? How do we give the best possible instructions on how to do this? And also then just iterating with our early pilot users to say, what did you think of the results? Were they easy to understand? What would you have liked to see instead? And really creating what I'm proud to say is an incredible product at this point and platform that really supports you throughout this journey.
Before we get too deep into Aydn, I'd love to talk a little bit more about your career and profession before you started your own business. Will you share just a little bit more around what you were up to and kind of how you decided to make the big leap into entrepreneurship?
Yeah, so I would say I started being interested in genetics ever since I learned what it was. So that was way back in undergrad. And as soon as I learned you could use genetics to find the root cause of a disease and potentially develop novel treatments as a result, I knew that's what I wanted to spend my life doing. So when I did my PhD work at Duke, I was there at a really cool time. So it was with the advent of this technology called next generation sequencing, which is basically a really fast way to sequence someone's entire genome. That was really only made possible because we had already done the Human Genome Project, which gave us the scaffold of the 23 chromosomes in your body. And so then you can basically, next generation sequencing lets you like chop the genome up into tiny little bits, sequence them quickly, and then remap them against that scaffold that we know about, like basically what order do these pieces of your DNA go in. And so that was really cool. There was a lot of just figuring out how to do the computational biology necessary to analyze those data sets. And so we did a lot of finding rare disease genes. In particular, I did a lot for rare undiagnosed childhood disorders. So you would sequence the child and both the parents to see what was different that might be causing a severe rare condition in these children. We also did a lot looking at inherited epilepsy risk. And then I went on to UCLA and did my postdoc there with Dan Geschwin, who runs their precision health department at UCLA. And there I got to run a $9 million research project in collaboration with researchers at Stanford, where we used whole genome sequencing and machine learning to identify 25 new autism genes, including some of the first evidence for inherited risk in autism. So really, really rewarding work, really exciting work, and just made me even more in awe of the power of genetics.
How did you decide basically to leave all of that behind and build a company?
I think it became basically like to the point where if I didn't do it, I knew I would regret it. That's a big part of it. The other part of it is it was just more that I realized I could make a bigger impact more quickly in a non-academic setting, because I knew I had, had the advantage of watching other direct consumer companies exist and navigate and kind of create the regulatory landscape that we operate in. And it was benefiting also from, doctors being more and more familiar with pharmacogenetics and the power of genomics in precision medicine. So I think I was benefiting from all of that. The time just felt right. And I think push I needed off the ledge to actually like leave my postdoc and do it was that I applied to Y Combinator. And I applied as a solo female technical founder and thought there's no way I will get in. And instead I got in and I was like, okay, I guess I am doing this.
Tell us more about that. Like, how is the YC application process? Any like tips or advice for other founders who might be listening who want to apply to YC?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I was most pleasantly surprised by in making the leap from academia to startup world was how generous other founders can be. I mean, it's also insane to say that, being a founder and knowing how busy everyone is, but it's also so hard that like everyone has benefited from someone else giving them 10 minutes of their time, And so I think there are people out there who will do mock YC interviews with you. They look at your application. You could distribute your answers to questions across 10 people and, get quick answers. Like, I think just, especially if you're not coming from almost like a biz dev world or a business world, it's weird to go around asking for like feedback or advice sometimes, but it kind of just is the norm, and people are really, I think, generous and willing to help. So I would just say, don't be afraid to ask for help. And the other thing I would say is lots of people apply many times to Y Combinator before getting in. So don't be afraid to do that. And also, if you know someone who's been in YC, they can also write you a letter of recommendation, and that is really helpful as well.
Amazing. What would you say was like the biggest value add that you got out of YC?
I think the biggest value add was the FOMO created around demo day and raising. That's just, there's nothing else like it. Most people can't get a fundraise done in, 2 weeks. So that is incredibly powerful. And then the network, because then you have this network of, many, I guess, over a decade at least at this point, of other founders who you can lean on, who might have an intro to someone. And YC community has really been fostered. So people are very much used to helping each other down the line, even outside of just your batch.
Yeah. So you mentioned you were a solo founder when you went into YC. Did you end up bringing on a co-founder, or are you still the solo founder of Adyn?
I am still a solo founder. I have an incredible team though, so it doesn't feel as lonely or hard, but yeah, I'm a solo founder, which I think has been both hard and probably avoided some of the things that you hear about being hard from having a co-founder as well.
Yeah, I guess what was your thought process around going the solo founder route versus finding a co-founder?
I think I looked at the data. I think a lot of companies have ended because of having a co-founder relationship go bad. I was lucky in that I was the technical co-founder. I knew how to program. I had the genetics expertise to do it. And I also had enough kind of advisor people around me telling me that I could do it, which I think was helpful. And I think it's different for everyone, right? And I think if you have the perfect person, but I almost did some like co-founder dating thinking I should do it. And I didn't happen upon the perfect person at that time.
I'm pretty sure the stat is that the number one reason startups fail is co-founder breakups and dilemma, if I am remembering that correctly.
I think that's correct.
Totally understand your reasoning.
And that's not to say it doesn't make it easier sometimes, right? Having another person to take on the burden and do half the work is great.
Yeah. So to your point of amazing advisors, I imagine Anne Wojcicki is one of them. She's built an
Yes,
amazing, probably very relevant company to what you're building.
absolutely.
So how have you thought about bringing on advisors like her? Like who else is kind of in your advisor orbit? And how did you go out and find those people and, attract them to your company?
It's interesting. I think some of my investors who I have brought on have been also just great at helping network for me. So a lot of the time, some of the best people are just like someone who was like, you should have a call with this person. And then it was just like we clicked immediately and understood it. I think my favorite example of that was our endocrinology advisor. She and I chatted before I had even started Aydn when I was just thinking about it. And she immediately understood my vision for what I wanted to do with the endocrinology side of things and the research that could be done there. And it was just like, it became a no-brainer. Like she wanted to work with me and vice versa. So I think, you don't have to rush into these things. I think people sometimes feel like they have to like commit and give away a bunch of equity right away. I also think you can like, it'll just happen. Like in some ways it'll just happen. I also think some people have the strategy of getting the biggest names. Yes, you can go and get really big names and they might never lift a finger for your company. So my advice would be at least get a balance. Find those people who understand and have something unique to bring to the table, who have deep expertise in something, because that can be just truly invaluable and really, really worth the equity. And maybe, a big name will help you get an investor or a newspaper article or something, but I think the staying power is in the people with the deep expertise.
Back to your point of YC and being able to fundraise very quickly through Demo Day, can you share a little bit about your experience as a first-time solo female founder fundraising and, how you were really able to tackle that?
Yeah, I've shared this tidbit before. It never gets any less shocking, but one of the biggest predictors of if someone was interested in progressing in the conversation or investing was if they understood the problem. That was in my notes template for every pitch. Did they understand the problem A to F? Right? Sometimes you can't tell. So you're like, I don't know, C, maybe. But like people, you'll know. Like you'll
This
know if
problem
they
seems
got the
so
problem.
obvious to me that I can't imagine someone not getting it, to be honest. That is wild.
But and then you take the stat that only 7% of decision makers in venture are women. So it was more common than not. And then this has now been talked about so much more, even since I did that raise in 2020. But, the male VCs, let me ask my wife. Oh, well, I don't know. I went, my wife didn't have that problem. My daughter didn't have that problem. I don't think it's real. I'm like, but I have a CDC article telling you that 80% of women try 3 or more methods, not counting the pill. Like, this is real. I have articles telling you the number one reason for switching birth control is side effects. You don't care about the scientific paper. Like, this is a fact. This is not a and I think especially at the early stages when you're selling the vision and you're selling like problem and possible solution. Because at that point it was myself and an empty white box with an Aydn logo on it. You're selling the dream and the vision. And so if they don't get the problem, you're not going to get off the ground. And so that was just something that I had to almost like just move on. Just don't. If they don't get it, they're not right for you. And it never ceases to amaze me how many investors are out there. So you'll find your fit. Is my recommendation. Yeah.
I'm curious, like, in your opinion, why do you think like a problem like this has been ignored for so many years? And I mean, I think there are like many different facets of women's health that have really not been addressed and I think are like starting to be addressed by some of the amazing new companies like yours at Adyn. But why do you think a lot of change has taken so long?
I struggle with this answer. I want to say something different almost every time, but I think ultimately it partly comes down to like founder market fit, in that I not only suffered this problem, but had the expertise to actually solve it. And so I think that's part of it. That's not to say I'm the only person in the world who could try to solve it. But I also think getting a truly new category creating product adopted is hard, right? Because there's a certain element of like a learning curve you need to get over and a price point. And, there's just a million different things that make it challenging. And so, I hope that there continues to be more and more research dollars, not just venture dollars, that also go into these topics, including what we're doing. But at this point, we already have the largest, drug side effect database in the world on birth control. So we already have this like massive head start. And I'm excited now that we've kind of done a lot of the painstaking like R&D portion of it, that we can just continue to build that out and make our own tests, more and more specific and contribute to the body of knowledge to help doctors, ideally changing the standard of care so that doctors are just like, why would I ever prescribe without knowing these results?
To the kind of like consumer learning curve point, like when you officially launched Aydn, and since you're going direct to consumer, like how did you first get the test in women's hands, and how did you educate and convince them on the price point and convince them on this is something you should invest in?
We did pre-order sales when I was going through YC, which was very much like, you will not get this for some extended period of time. But that was incredible validation because people really did buy it and were willing to spend hundreds of dollars on it. And that just validates the pain point so much, so quickly. I think that was really key for the fundraise also. And then we got those early pre-order users and some pilot users, which were basically, in my network and my team's network, to go through the process and just give us as much feedback as possible. And after we did that, we felt ready to do more of a public launch. And so we did that. We did some earned press. We had an incredible article in Elle magazine. And then since then, we've not really invested a ton in marketing yet, though we will be soon, but we have experimented with primarily paid search, which I think was effective because people are actively searching for, you can think of it as like a pull mechanism, right? Someone's coming to you being like, what's the best birth control without side effects? You're like, okay, let me take you over here and show you what we have. So that's been really effective for us.
Like, what has been kind of like your biggest learning lesson or biggest challenge in all of this?
I think the need to be pretty ruthless in your prioritization and focus. When you're building something from the absolute ground up, there are 7 million things you're going to want to do or feel like you need to do. But how do you identify what you actually need to do and have the resources to do right now? And that hopefully that builds on the next thing on the list that you need to do and have the resources to do.
Love that. What is your biggest priority these days?
Fundraising and thinking about growth. So we're starting to actually post fundraise, be able to invest in our growth, both direct to consumer and starting to sell to clinicians.
Amazing. I feel like selling to clinicians is like probably a massive, massive opportunity there.
Yes, I think it's pretty wild. Do you want to guess how many birth control prescriptions an OB-GYN writes per day?
I mean, I have no idea, but a lot. I would love to know actually, though.
Yeah, 20 to 24.
Wow.
A day.
That is wild. And then you multiply that by all of the...
By 50,000 OB-GYNs. Yeah. Yeah.
You mentioned like you're getting outreach from these doctors, but how are you thinking about like getting to them at a broader scale?
We're early days in thinking about this strategy, but really basically finding a handful of our early adopters who are really passionate, which I think we're very lucky in having found some of those already, who we're hoping can then, really talk about the product, not just to their patients, but to their colleagues as something they should do. And I think for us, the most important part is just continuing to gather really robust clinical outcome data so that we can continue to show that to these providers. It's one thing to say like, oh no, in theory, or I don't like that, like I'd have to wait for the results to come in, or, I'm sure there's a million reasons they could come up with, but I'm like, okay, but we've found genetic risk for blood clot in 8% of our population. Do you really want to be prescribing and risking putting them at this 30-fold increased risk of a blood clot? We have 94% of patients switching birth control methods as a result of taking the test. Does that tell you that they're getting it right the first time when they go to the doctor? No, right? So giving them that kind of robust clinical outcome data, I think, is going to make it really sell itself.
Yeah. Have you ever considered partnering with like the Tias of the world?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity with all of these primary care practices and ones that are slightly more specialized, like Tia, which we love, to help get this out there and give them some diversification in a crowded market as well.
As we start to wrap things up, one of my favorite questions, can you share a female founder, investor, or leader who inspires you and a bit about why?
Oh, there are so many. I'm going to cheat and go off the one that's most top of mind because I watched an episode of Gutsy last night. It's on Apple TV, is with Hillary and Chelsea Clinton. And I would say I have looked up to Hillary for a very long time, and just respect how much she has had to deal with and had to persevere through, and is clearly just so incredibly brilliant and accomplished, and had, the scrutiny of the entire world on her to be able to like continue to function in that kind of setting is just so inspiring, and makes my, complaint about men not understanding the problem just all feel so pitiful in comparison.
Truly. And then finally, where can everyone find you and where can they find Adyn?
If you want to find me, I sometimes post on Twitter at Sequin Labcoat, and LinkedIn is just my name. And then Aydn, our social is at Aydn Health everywhere. And our website is aydn.com, ADYN.com.
Amazing. Well, I'll make sure to get everything linked in the show notes. And it was so nice to finally meet you. And thank you so much for coming on and sharing a bit about your story.
Thank you for getting our work out there. I appreciate it.